and welcome back to Bengali Girl. This is your podcast host, Nikita, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Today's episode is very on brand for me. If you know me on my personal life, you would know that I am a big advocate about talking about anxiety, talking about depression, talking about just having thoughts that you can't control and wishing that you could control, and even just self-growth. Much to some people's dismay, that's my brand. But before I begin, I hope you guys are having a lovely Ramadan. I pray that your duas get fulfilled. I hope that you feel fulfilled. This Ramadan has been difficult for me, not for the eating and drinking part, but more for the routine aspect. I'm the kind of person who needs a proper routine. And not having that has been difficult because, of course, my routine used to be, waking up early, going to the gym, going to work, and then in bed by 8 p.m. But now it's like I go to work out after iftar because I cannot have the energy to go work out before, which is... I wish I could. I can do some days when I feel like it's one of those phases that women go through, but not most of the time. This episode, I really want to focus on just anxiety because if I were to talk about or unpack depression, it's going to take a lot longer than what this episode needs to run for. But before I begin, I just do want to emphasize on the fact that anxiety and depression are two different concepts, okay? A lot of the times in Bangla, we have the habit of mixing words. For example, pagol chagol. So some people are like, oh, oirokom keno? And then they're like, oh, she has anxiety, depression. So yeah, it's two different things. The second thing I want to talk about is I am not a licensed professional. I am talking about just based on my experience and also just the fact that I have anxiety, and I did some research to understand what is happening with me, and I went to therapy as well. And third thing, I want to talk about a story of how I knew that anxiety is so on brand for me. So back in 2020, I was talking to this friend and she was sharing, about the fact that it's difficult for her to articulate her thoughts. It's difficult for her to just go through interactions. She doesn't want to talk. She just feels gloomy all the time, etc., etc. And I was telling her that, maybe you should journal and everything, and just giving her genuine advice that helped me cope with my anxiety and depression, because I wasn't sure what she had because she wasn't diagnosed yet. And as we're talking, we're having this really nice, really good, productive conversation. This random douchebag comes in between and he's like, oh my God, don't talk to Nikita. And she's like, why? She's like, oh, she's just gonna make you sad. When I heard that, I was like, oh wow, okay, so maybe this is on brand for me. The reason I asked him, of course, why would you say that? And he's like, oh, because all you do is talk about this. I was like, Interesting to know that that's all I can bring to the world is talk about anxiety and depression. And even if that is all that I can do, I'm really happy because it needs to not have a negative stigmatization, right? I really wanted to know, when did anxiety actually, become stigmatized? Because anxiety hasn't always been seen as a problem for most of human history. It was considered part of survival, because if we look at the earlier human types, there was Neanderthal, there was, Denisovans, there were other earlier hominins. Anxiety likely existed in them because anxiety is an evolutionary survival mechanism. It helps with risk assessment, danger avoidance, and decision making. Any species that needed to navigate complex social structures, hunt, or avoid predators would have benefited from having anxiety. But it did become a negative connotation to it. But what is anxiety, right? Anxiety is basically your brain's alarm system kicking in, even when there is no immediate danger. It is a mix of worry, fear, and physical tension designed to keep you alert and prepared for threats. Fear which is sometimes often considered anxiety, but it's not. Fear is when there is immediate danger. For example, oh no, there's a crocodile in front of me. Anxiety is, what if a crocodile attacks me tomorrow, which is a future or imagined danger. Now, of course, there are different types of anxieties, but I don't really think my own perspective is that anxiety is actually helpful. It kept me focused, it kept me motivated, it kept me cautious, and the only difficulty is when it becomes too much, right? When it becomes too much, it interfered with my daily life and it became overwhelming, the thoughts. But, for most of human history, it was just a part of survival. The stigma around it as a weakness or disorder really developed in the last couple of centuries, especially with industrialization and the changing of social expectations. And you might think, oh, like factories? No. Let's go back. Let's talk about early human society. Anxious or anxiety was normal. It kept people alive by making them cautious. Ancient Greeks, around 400 BCE, recognized anxiety as a medical issue, calling it melancholia or hysteria. Stoic philosophers saw it as a mental challenge to overcome through reason. Religious interpretations often linked anxiety to spiritual struggles or sometimes even demonic possessions, especially in the extreme cases. So when did anxiety actually become a problem? The 18th and 19th century, the rise of the nervous disorders. So during the Enlightenment, doctors started diagnosing nervous illnesses in upper class people. Sigmund Freud, late 1800s, tied anxiety to repressed emotions, making it seem like a personal failing rather than just a natural reaction. 20th century medicalization and just war trauma, right? World War I, World War II, there was PTSD that was brought into public awareness. Anxiety was still misunderstood. The 1950s, the 70s, they saw a pharmaceutical boom. So there was Valium, there was Xanax, shifting anxiety from personal weakness to just a medical issue. And in the late 20th century, anxiety was seen as a lack of toughness, especially for men. You can imagine the random douchebag was a man after all. The self-help industry pushed ideas like positive thinking and sometimes ignoring the real anxiety disorders. Only in recent years, with the mental health advocacy and social media, has anxiety started to be normalized again. Why did anxiety get stigmatized? Well, society started valuing toughness and efficiency, so anxiety was seen as a flaw. Anxiety was viewed as weak, especially for men. People used to think you could just snap out of it. How many times have you heard that, right? And once anxiety became a disorder, it felt more like a diagnosis than a normal emotion and also a profit-making system for the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, now the conversation is shifting. People recognize that anxiety isn't just a personal flaw, but a more real and manageable condition. The stigma still exists, but it's slowly breaking down. And I think the reason it's breaking down is because a lot of people are realizing that they do have anxiety. And sometimes when so many people have it, it's just not a stigma anymore. It's just something that we need to reshape and rehone, right? I think one of the most difficult conversations that I had to do when I was finally understanding that what's going on in my brain is just not normal. It might just be my anxiety rather than normal thoughts, right? When I started to understand the differentiation between normal thoughts and anxious thoughts, the difficult conversation was definitely my parents, because how can you explain it to people who were told that crying is weak for men, or who were told stop crying as soon as one tear dropped out of their eyes, or who were given these big responsibilities at a very delicate stage? How can you tell them that you, who had a better privileged life compared to them, are having anxiety? how can you make them understand that? And I don't think it's ever going to be resolved. I think it's a work in progress. I felt when I was going into this conversation, actually, it happened by chance. It didn't happen because I wanted to have this conversation. It happened because I remember it was parent-teacher meeting, and this teacher was just saying that, she's doing well, but sometimes she does well in like class tests, she does well in homeworks and stuff, but like as soon as it's exam time, like the final exam, she just like it's just a 180, and they are not able to understand what's happening. And I can hear them telling this to my parents, and I was literally having a panic attack right there and then as they're telling this, because I got so scared of what my parents are gonna do after we go back home. Like, are they gonna scream at me? Are they gonna take away my phone or whatever? Like, I was so worried that as soon as I came back home, I took a bunch of meds. I'm not going to talk about which med because I don't want to encourage anything. And I just went to sleep. And I thought, this is it. My life is over. Nothing is going to be fixed. If I'm not doing well in school, means I don't get to go to university, means I don't get a good job, means I don't get to be settled in my life, means I don't get financial independence. And I remember waking up and I'm like, oh shit, I woke up. I thought I wasn't. But I did wake up, and my dad came into the room and he said, what's wrong? And I think that helped. Instead of them barraging me with questions of why my performance was like this and blah, 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 my dad asked, what's wrong? And it was easy to talk to him. It was easy to talk to my dad about what's happening. It was easy to tell him about, my anxiety, that I've been actually going to this counselor of sorts to help me with my anxiety and just planning and stuff. It helped. But he didn't understand. He didn't. He said, what you're telling me, it doesn't make sense to me, because you have everything. If you want extra classes, we'll send you to extra classes and everything. But for me, it wasn't that. It was the fact that it was a final exam. The finality of it all gave me anxiety, if that makes sense. And it was really difficult to have that conversation with my father. I thought, and I'm pretty sure you thought it was gonna end well, but it didn't. It ended up with me crying, him telling me that, you're just not good enough, and it triggering a lot more emotions. And I remember, my friend at the time told me that, oh my God, one day I'm going to have this conversation with your parents and I'm going to tell them everything that they did and the effect that they have on you. And I'm just like, yeah, it's not going to work. It's not. If you tell them the wrong things that they did and tell them that, hey, you could have just helped by saying this and this, they are not going to listen. And it's so difficult because as kids, one of our main priorities is to get this parental validation, because we are kids after all. We do need validation. And it was such a difficult struggle, and I don't think anyone can escape it unless your parents have actually gone to therapy and themselves and know how to handle these kind of difficult situations. They will never understand how to deal with emotions. And I'm not here I don't want to talk only shit about the parents. I don't want to only talk about what they can't do. What we need to understand as their kids is we need to stop valuing their validation, especially when it comes to our emotions. Okay, yeah, you get 10 out of 10 on a test. Yeah, you deserve the validation. But if you put so much value on what they think about what you are thinking, there's the problem. That's the root cause. You cannot be reliant on someone that much that you value and you base your emotions. It's like walking around on eggshells, right? Because you would just think, oh my God, I cannot cry now, I cannot do this now. Do it. I'm telling you, just do it. It's not what's gonna happen. What's gonna happen? They're gonna tell you stop crying. They won't know how to comfort you, but that's already happened. That's already done and dusted. But feel your emotions. Let your emotions run. And this applies to both men and women, and especially men. I feel like, unfortunately, men have always been told you have to be tough and rough. And if you cry, you lose your masculinity, or you lose, being a male, you lose that whole male experience or something. And I just want to take some moment and talk about men in Desi societies and anxiety. It's honestly a silent struggle. In South Asian Desi cultures, or let's talk about Bengali cultures, men are often expected to be the providers, the protectors, and pillars of strength for their families. This rigid expectation leaves very little room for being vulnerable, especially when it comes to anxiety and mental health. Instead of being seen as a natural response to stress, anxiety in men is often dismissed as weakness, laziness, or a lack of resilience. From a young age, the boys are taught to suppress their emotions. Crying, worrying, or expressing fear is seen as unmanly. Anxiety is often misunderstood as overthinking or being too soft. Of course, the concept of manusha ki bolbe, or what will people say, makes it much worse. Men fear judgment if they admit that they're struggling, Of course, there's the toxic masculinity, which is unnecessary. Like a lot of the Bengali men that I've spoken to, they think that seeking therapy or medication is often considered unnecessary. It's them appearing weak or dishonoring the family, because a real man is just supposed to handle his own problems. Unlike physical illness, anxiety isn't always visible. So it's brushed off as just stress or just a phase. And in our culture, success is often measured by job titles, wealth, and marriage stability. And the anxiety over not being successful enough, or the constant pressure to compete, adds the mental load for both men and women. Sometimes I've been in situations where a man would say, or a man would express doubt or stress about a situation, and he would be told by the people around him that o to thik ase, tumar ki hoise. The comparison culture, that so and so is doing fine, why can't you? And unfortunately, because of all this, a lot of Desi men find alternative ways to cope. There is the suppression, which is, burying feelings deep inside and pretending everything is fine. Overworking, of course, anger or irritability. There is, since sadness is not acceptable, the emotions often come out as frustration or aggression in men. There is, of course, a substance use, such as drinking, smoking, or unhealthy coping mechanisms, and avoidance, ignoring problems until they become overwhelming. Now, how can we, right? And as Desi people, Bengali people, address anxiety? And I think the first thing would be to recognize that anxiety is normal. It's not a weakness. It's just a natural human response to stress. And even successful, strong men, women experience anxiety. We need to create safe space for conversations, such as friendships and support groups where men and women can express themselves without judgment. We need to break the cycle and start having open conversations, even in families. So now, whenever my dad, funny story, just yesterday, my dad was telling me, oh, so now I have to pay for all of your dental work. Why is that? And I was like, Dad, when I was a kid, doctors told you that I need to have full tooth like extracted. They told you, but you didn't agree, so you took me to another doctor, and even that doctor told you I need to have extractions. You didn't agree, so you went to another doctor, and whichever doctor said I don't need extractions, you went with them. What was your reasoning? And he's like, I don't know. I just don't know. And I'm like, oh, that's why you're paying for the dental work. And he's like, what else? What else? You and your sister should just make a list of everything that I didn't provide. And I was like, sure, I'll ask my therapist. Because there is a huge list of what I was not provided, especially in the emotional sector. And this was just like me being sly and just putting it in that, I do go for therapy sessions and I have like a list and you're not perfect. But it's these sort of conversations that I have that kind of normalize the fact that I have anxiety to them. I don't need them to like understand or anything. I just need them to know and respect the boundaries, right? We need to seek professional help without shame, might I add. Therapy and counseling should be as normal as going to a doctor for physical pain. When I first started therapy sessions, it was difficult for me to connect with my therapists. I went to multiple because finding the right therapist is like dating. You need to go through a couple before you find the therapist, right? I prefer going to a South Asian therapist, and there are more South Asian therapists, which is making it easier for us to get culturally relevant help. And I remember talking to like a couple of girlfriends, and I was telling them that I do go for therapy. My partner believes in therapy. We go, he goes for therapy. Like, it's good. It's all good. It's not like we need help. It's just so that we can do like a mental workout. We go for gym and stuff, but like we need mental workout too. Sometimes a release like that is good. And they're like, oh my God, how do you do it? And I was like, I don't know. I really don't. It depends. You need to be open. Your mindset needs to be open first before you can open others, We need to challenge like societal expectations. A person's worth is definitely not their salary, job title, or toughness. We need to set boundaries and prioritize mental well-being. And when you prioritize mental well-being, it's not selfish, it's necessary. And this is something that I'm trying to like have conversations with my nephew, with, the kids that I talk to, that it's okay to talk about feelings. It's not weak. And they're the young generation. So when you talk like this, you're kind of shaping them up and you're helping to change that narrative. Because the stigma around anxiety in our society is not just a personal issue. It's deeply woven into cultural expectations. I'm glad that the younger generations are becoming more aware and the conversations about mental health are slowly becoming less taboo. The challenge now is to normalize vulnerability so that people don't have to suffer in silence. So you understand, right? Where men are said that, oh, you cannot think, it's just stress, it's just a phase, blah, blah, blah. When women have anxiety, they are told that you are overthinking, you are just very emotional. From a very young age, Desi women, Bengali women are expected to prioritize others over themselves, which means their mental health often, most of the time, takes a backseat. The pressure to be the perfect daughter, wife, mother, and daughter-in-law creates a breeding ground for chronic anxiety, yet talking about it is still taboo. The first and the foremost has to be Manusha ki bolbe. For men, the first thing about why anxiety is common and not talked about, the first thing in men would be, of course, it's considered weak. But for women, it's Manusha ki bolbe. Every decision from career choices to marriage has always come under scrutiny. Women feel trapped between personal desires and societal expectations, leading to constant overthinking and self-doubt. Of course, if you're an unmarried woman, there's the anxiety over being judged for not finding a husband on time. And if you're a married woman, there's a pressure to balance work, household duties, and the in-laws perfectly. And if you're a mother, the anxiety over being the perfect mother while juggling career and family is a pressure added. they us girls, we're often told, be quiet, don't argue. Good girls don't complain, they're usually quiet. It's your responsibility to keep the family together. And it's led to a lifetime of bottling up of emotions, which manifests as chronic stress and anxiety. Women face constant body image pressure, especially in our culture. In our culture, men don't face beauty and body image pressures as much as women do. Because most men, as soon as they are married or 30 plus, it's okay for them to have a tummy. But for women, it has to be fair skin, it has to be a thin body, it has to be long hair. I've had relatives casually comment, oh, you've gained weight. Why do you look so tired? When people say, why do you look so tired? Just because you're not wearing makeup. And I'm just like, are you serious? What do you mean? And it just fuels the low self-esteem and social anxiety. Many women are still to this day pressured into arranged marriages, they're pressured into limited career choices, and are pressured into traditional roles. And not having the decisions or not having control over personal decisions leads to this helplessness, frustration, and guess what? Anxiety. If a woman chooses herself, if she chooses her career, her travel, her mental health, she's seen as selfish. If she puts others first, she's always told that she's not doing enough. The cycle of never feeling good enough has led to a deep-rooted anxiety. Because mental health is not openly discussed, many women don't even realize they're struggling with anxiety. Instead, it shows up as overthinking and perfectionism, constant worry about pleasing everyone and avoiding mistakes, insomnia and fatigue, racing thoughts that keep them awake at night even if they're exhausted, stomach issues and headaches. Anxiety often manifests as digestive problems or migraines, irritability and mood swings. Unexpressed frustration turns into sudden outbursts. I hate that. I hate mood swings, and I've experienced so many mood swings, and I can feel myself, going through all these moodiness, and I hate it. I hate this, but it's part of being a woman, I guess. Avoidance and people pleasing, saying yes to everything to avoid conflict, even at the cost of personal well-being. Since open conversations about mental health are still rare, many women find indirect ways to cope. They suppress it by saying, I should be grateful for what I have. They also overwork, they drown in responsibilities. They use food as a coping mechanism. They become a perfectionist and they pretend everything is fine. So I guess, it's very important, to understand that the stigma around anxiety in Desi men is deeply woven into cultural expectations, and the anxiety in Desi women is often silenced and deeply rooted. It's just an overwhelming mental load, And I think it's very important that when you have conversations with your niece, your nephew, your kids, it's important to make them feel okay about talking about their anxiety. Even if it's talking about the same thing again and again and again and again, let them. You are their comfort person. A human being will not come up to a random stranger and start talking about one topic again and again and again. The reason that they're doing that to you is because you are their comfort person. So if you're a parent and if your kid's doing that, let them. If you're a friend and if your friend is doing that, let them. If you are a husband or a wife and your partner is doing that, let them. Just let them voice and be vocal, because a lot of the times when we are quiet and when we are silent, we often bottle up, and bottling up is never a healthy coping mechanism, because when it pops out, it's going to harm you and everyone around you, and it's going to come out completely wrong. So If you are still here, if you're still listening to me, and if you're a Desi girl, and especially if you're a Bengali girl, and if you're a Bengali boy, man, woman, lady, whatever, I hope you know that it's okay to be anxious. I hope you know that it's okay to have these thoughts. I hope you know that whatever you're thinking is valid and can be solved. And I hope you know that every person around you that cares about you will listen to you. And I really, really, really want to emphasize on the importance of having the right set of people around you. People who will help you through this. You might never get out of it because I've never met someone who's beaten anxiety, but just help you through it. And I hope you liked this episode today, but thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Bye.